Fine. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this. My name is Harry, and I just really appreciate you guys all coming here. When I first came up with the idea of this tutorial, I said, having been to a few PyCons, I said, you know what, there's a surprising number of people who are beginners who come to these conferences. And a lot of people go, what? Who comes and pays $400 for a professional program? Okay, the Python ecosystem, the bright green. Who ships some Office software and decides that one of the default themes help you get the most out of the conference this week? So the Python ecosystem, jargon, I'm going to try and help you to understand in-jokes like this. So this is an in-joke, and this is a controversial T-shirt from PyCon 2 years ago. Someone just walking around with a T-shirt that says 2.8. Like that. So I'm going to try and explain to you what the in-joke is here and why it's controversial. So as you've probably gathered, there's two versions of Python out there that are common. There's Python 2 and Python 3. And when I first came along to the Python world, do you feel this is a little bit loud, tech guy? A bit loud? When I first came along to the Python world, which was back in like 2009, there was no doubt that Python 2.7, or Python 2, is what everybody used, and Python 3 was a kind of like experimental new one that was like, okay, yeah, in theory that's the future of the language, but nobody really uses that for anything real. And I've actually seen that completely transform, and to the extent that like now, where we are now, I think we can genuinely say to new people and for new projects, people are using Python 3. Big projects of Python 3, all sorts of Python libraries now support Python 3. They work in Python 3 by default. All of the core development of the language happens in Python 3, and they only put sort of fixes and security bugs back into the old version of Python 2. And that's not to say there's a lot of Python 2 code out there. Probably most of the code in the world that's Python is still Python 2 code. But people now recognize that that's kind of the legacy version of Python. That's the old version of Python. You're just keeping it around because it's perfectly good, basically. And it's a lot of effort to switch from Python 2 to Python 3 if you've got a large, hundreds of thousands of lines of code. But I think it's reasonable to say that, new projects, your default choice should be Python 3, and you need reasons not to use Python 3 rather than the other way around. And so 2.8 is a controversial T-shirt because the last ever version of Python 2 is 2.7. That's what the core team have announced. So wandering around with a T-shirt saying 2.8 is saying that you disagree with that whole philosophy and that you want to keep going with Python 2. It's a sort of obstinate, deliberately confrontational T-shirt. Look out for one of those. There's probably a person with an interesting bee in their bonnet or chip on their shoulder that would have an interesting conversation for you. Da-da-da-da. Good. Right. So the next thing you're going to learn is that there's Python. It's doing great. It's doing fantastic in education. People at NASA use it. People at Dropbox use it. The language itself, you've all kind of played with it a little bit today. It's designed to be wonderful to use, and we all love it. Outside of just Python itself, the Python interpreter, you'll have seen this thing, pip install, which is how you install add-on packages and add-on modules for Python. And so it's really about saying, the Python standard library lets you do a bunch of things, but then all sorts of specialist fields are going to have specialist modules. And you get to them via this magic thing called pip install. And pip install goes out to a thing called PyPI, which stands for the Python Package Index, not to be confused with PyPy, which is Python in Python, which is an interpreter. And these 4 acronyms and many, many others you'll find in my jargon file. So in the repo that I've put on the USB keys or that you can download online, I've put a big long list of definitions of common Python terms and acronyms. So have a look for that. If you can't find that, put your hand up or get your coach to help you. But I recommend have a little read through that this evening, and then you'll find that tomorrow and the rest of the conference, a bunch of this jargon will be more obvious. So pip, PyPI, Python Package Index, also used to be called the cheese shop. Why is that? Well, that's because of a Monty Python sketch. So there's a bunch of Monty Python jokes explained in there as well. Cheese shop, hundreds of types of cheeses, and the kinds of packages that you might be into to install. There's web development, ponies, bottles, and flasks. This is the Django pony, so the main framework you might use for web development is called Django. That's the biggest one in Python with the biggest community, but there's also some upstarts like Flask, which is like Django, but a little bit simpler, and then there's Bottle that's even simpler still. So there's a lot of people out there in the Python world doing web development, from the people who build YouTube and Dropbox and Discuss, who you'll find out there, to people with like startups like me. I work at a thing called Python Anywhere. Awful lot of web development happening in Python. So if that's what you're interested in, look out for things like the Django pony and talks about that. Who else is doing stuff with Python? Well, there's people are building, you can build GUI applications, so things like the idle application. My old company called Resolver One, we used to build a Pythonic spreadsheet, which was, how many people here kind of did mostly spreadsheets before they got into programming? One? Okay, well, Jason knows where I'm coming from. So this company had a dream of saying, well, spreadsheets are great, but if you start programming spreadsheets in Excel, you get into Visual Basic, and Visual Basic is horrible. Wouldn't it be nice if you had Python instead? So there's a whole Python spreadsheet written in Python that lets you run Python as well as spreadsheet functions, which is now abandoned, but it was a good, fun concept at the time. So you can build GUI applications, you can build server applications like websites, you can build embedded applications, so you can put Python on your Raspberry Pi. The Pi, you've heard of the Raspberry Pi? Who's not heard of the Raspberry Pi? Hands up, you'll get a prize if you haven't heard of the Raspberry Pi. No prize on that one then. Good, the Pi in Raspberry Pi actually stands for Python if you ask what's his name, Eben Upton. So that's all about Python. On embedded devices, you can put Nick, who was the lead Python person on the BBC Microbit project. The Microbit is a tiny little embedded microcontroller computer, which will run Python. They're giving out to school kids in the UK. And so if you want to write little Python code that just flashes a few LEDs on a tiny little chip, you can do that. There's Python all over the shop. And then finally, the mad scientists, of course. That's a new addition to the Python community. There's lots of people who are doing number crunching, who are trying to do big data, who are trying to do analysis, who are trying to do charting. And there's a huge ecosystem of tools out there for people doing science stuff, from the IPython notebook to the pandas library, which is like spreadsheets, but in Python, machine learning toolkits and natural language processing toolkits and spatial data analysis toolkits. So for practically any application that you can think of, you can probably pip install something and it'll be there. Pip install astronomy, I think, is a bunch of astronomy libraries. If you want to do astronomy in Python, it's all there. So I guess what I'm saying is whenever you're trying to solve a problem, have a look that maybe there's already a community of people that have solved that problem before and it's already done for you. And then, actually, yes, I remember myself, I was writing a thing that was parsing the output from a console. So a program would run, and the output would come out, and I needed to wrap it at 80 characters because I wanted to have a picture of what that console would look like if all the text had wrapped at 80 characters. So I spent probably about 8 hours writing a function that would take any kind of text input and wrap it at 80 characters neatly, thinking of all the edge cases for that. And then at the end of that, I discovered a Python standard library module called TextWrap, which I'd actually used every single day at work. I would do from TextWrap import ddent, which is a function that can re-indent code. And it never occurred to me to think that maybe a module called TextWrap might have a function in it that would be good at wrapping text at 80 characters, which of course it does. So that's when pip install is there, pip install thing, and it will just magically pull it down off the internet, install it onto your computer. Sometimes that doesn't work, especially if you're on Windows. So look out there. There are also some installers, people doing science. There's Anaconda is a great kind of all-in-one bundle of all the libraries you might need for doing sciencey stuff. Question over there.
How does pip deal with versions?
Yes. How does pip deal with versions? That's a very good question. I probably won't go into it at too much length now. But you can tell pip that you want a specific version of a package, and if you're working on more than one Python project at once on the same computer, you might have, if you're using Django, you might have Django version 1.5 over here and 1.7 over there. Having both installed on your computer at once can get confusing. There's a way of managing that called virtual environments, and you can find out more about that. You will find out more about that as you go through your various tutorials or software development career or whatever. So yes? Yeah, there's at least 2 people here who are interested in science, and one of them already had Anaconda installed when they got here, so that's working well. Right, that's pip. What is a Git? Has everyone heard this word Git? What is Git? Git is a version control system. What's a version control system? Oh, well, it's to put your source code under control. What's source code? Well, that's your Python code files. One way or another, this is basically a way of giving you an undo function. So as a programmer, and certainly this is the way I started out, you'd write some code and it would work, and you're like, oh, I want to change something, but I'm not sure I'm going to do it right. So what I'll do is, rather than just deleting the old code, I'm just going to comment it out and put the new code next to it. So I've got the old code commented out next to it, so I can easily go back to it. And that kind of works fine, but then after a while you get these files that are half full of commented out code and you can't remember what it was all for. And then you go, okay, what I'll do is I'll just save a version 1 and a version 2 and a version 3, and so you've got like myscript.1.py.2.py.3.py and so on. And it turns out that everyone has these same problems, and that as programmers we invent tools to solve our problems. So pretty soon, and I'm not saying this is something you need to learn immediately as a beginner, but probably about 6 months down the line, you're going to maybe get interested in version control systems, which are things that basically give you an undo function for your code. So version control systems are there to save different versions of your source code file as you go through its life, and as it gets bigger and more complicated, and give you ways of going back to where you were earlier and changing your mind about things. That's Git. One of the things about Git is that it was the first truly distributed version control system that not only let you do that, but it will also let you share copies of your code with somebody else and maybe be able to exchange changes that you've made to them and merge them if you've both gone off in slightly different directions and bring them back together. So it's a set of tools for that, but also these days Git is associated with GitHub and other solutions for taking your source code and publishing it online along with all the history of how it worked and giving you a collaborative development environment that lots of people. So it's one of the ways of publishing open source software. It's one of the ways of collaborating on open source software. So you'll find Git and GitHub are the tools that we all use to work together as programs on sort of projects around the world. Collaboration as well as just an undo function, I guess, is what I'm trying to get across there. So the final message there is that open source software, Python is open source. A lot of all the libraries I've mentioned are open source. That work gets done by people, in their bedrooms or in their lunch break, out of the goodness of their hearts. It also gets done at these things called sprints, which do exist at PyCon. So after these 2 days of tutorials, we have 3 days of talks, and then the rest of the week, which I think is 4 full days, are devoted to sprints. And sprints is where people who work on open source projects get together in the same room, and they're going to do a little bit of work on those open source projects and be actually in the same room with each other, which is great for communication and building enthusiasm and fun. And that is a thing for experienced developers to do, but it is also a thing that beginners can do. And all open source programs are keen to recruit new people, even total beginners. So I really encourage you, if you've not thought of doing this and you have some spare time, why not stay for the sprints and go and have a look around and see if there's any interesting projects that match your interests, where you could actually sit down with the authors of that and they can tour you. And if they do nothing but show you around their code base and show you how to install it and how to use the documentation, that person is still happy that they've found a new user and they've showed them around. And you've maybe asked some questions and you've taught that programmer something about why their documentation isn't that good for beginners and so on. So really, even as a beginner, go to the sprints, introduce yourself, and you're a useful person there. Right. And then the final thing, apart from all the jargon that I really wanted to talk to about Python, is about community. Now, as a British person, and it's very hard for me to say words like community with a straight face, or indeed express anything about feelings. But probably this really came home to me when an American guy called Justin kind of expressed this, or made this real for me, because being part of the Python community made me understand what this is all about. And I was there at a Django conference, and there was going to be a talk by a chap called Andrew Godwin about a thing called South, which had become the official Django database migrations framework. So whatever, that's a kind of detail, but what it is, it's a little tool that everyone had been using for ages to do database stuff with web development, and for ages it was a side project, and it had just been merged into the core of the Django project, and he'd released a new version of it, and it was kind of exactly the same as the old one, but better. And I was talking to Justin about it, and Justin said, hey, you're going to Andrew's talk? And I went, no. I mean, look, I've taken a look at it, and as far as I'm concerned, that talk goes like this. Hey, Andrew, is it more or less exactly the same as South? Yes. Did you do a good job? Is it now more obvious? Yes. Okay, thanks very much, talk over. And he goes, no, man, no. Listen, that's not the point, man. The point is this is Andrew's big day, man. Like, his code has been out there, and we've been using it for so long, and it's so useful, and it's been merged into the real Django, man. He's like part of it. Like, this is his day to stand up in front of everyone and say, here I am, this is my new project, and we're going to be there for him, man. And we're just going to say, thank you, man. We love you. Well done. And we love having you up there, and we're thankful for your work. And so you got to be there. And I don't think I did go in the end. But I at least got the message, and the message is, and the reason that we go to these conferences, these talks, is yes, okay, partially to learn and to find out new things, but it is also just to meet each other and to build this sense of community that we are all working on this together, and people deserve recognition, and that we're all in front of each other. So that's the community story, and the Python community isn't just Andrew Godwin standing up, and congratulations to him for having done all that work on Django migrations, and it isn't just PyCon. It's also any kind of a tool that you're working on is going to have a mailing list, is going to have an issue tracker. You'll be able to get in touch with the people that have done it, ask questions. There's going to be IRC channels where you can chat online to Python developers, and you'll find I did this when I was first learning Django, jump on there, ask a stupid question, and you'll be surprised at the people who are going to come there and answer your stupid question and explain why you've made mistakes and fix your problems for you out of the goodness of their heart, out of just the desire to help newcomers to come and enjoy programming like they did. So the Python community is out there, it's here in physical presence, it's out there online on mailing lists and on IRC, and it's also out there in the form of meetups. So pretty much every single major city is going to have some kind of Python meetup. And if you live in a major city and there's no Python meetup, when you go home, you should just start one, because you'll find all sorts of people will come together. And the Python is genuinely special, and my impression is that even compared to other programming languages, it is genuinely a community that's sort of welcoming, that encourages newcomers, that is kind of not, tries to keep our own ego under control, and welcome people and encourage them. So this whole idea of coming together once a week or once a month to learn things together and encourage people to start projects, and maybe just start up a crazy new idea about how, why don't we just put Python on a Raspberry Pi and we'll wire it up to a weather balloon and we'll take pictures from almost outer space. And 3 people might get together at a meetup and decide to do that, and that happens all the time. And you could be one of those people. So find your local Python meetup and go to it, and you'll find a lovely, welcoming atmosphere. Yes, and that is all absolutely true. Good, that's my Python ecosystem talk. Are there any questions about that? Any reactions to that? Yes, Nick. The code of conduct. Yeah, fine. Yeah. No, I was wondering whether I should go off on one about the diversity initiatives in Python as well. Maybe. Like programming became somehow a very male-dominated field, not for any particularly good reason. Python is one of those communities that's trying as hard as it can to kind of encourage more diversity and make it a more welcoming environment. One of the ways that I came in touch with that directly is an organization called Django Girls, which does kind of programming workshops for women total beginners interested in doing web development. It's a great thing, and there's lots of other diversity initiatives, and I think Python is really kind of leading the programming world at trying to encourage that, and it's one of the nice things about Python. And it's also one of the nice things on a personal level where, programming, if it can get a bit male-dominated, we can get all a little ego-driven and very argumentative. I'm very argumentative. And sometimes going out and having these kind of new communities allows you kind of new ways to interact, and it maybe encourages a more collaborative way of stop being so blokey all the time. Did that make any sense? That didn't come out very well structured as an answer. So the code of conduct is part of that. I mean, I'm sure you'll have read in your registration details, but it's really a way of codifying, like the reasons that we're here is all to do sort of learn programming and to meet other people who are software and developers. And it's really about saying, what's kind of okay and what's not okay. as a way of making sure that the event is as inclusive as possible and as welcoming as possible. So if you were thinking of jumping up and doing a lightning talk is one of the ways that you can participate in the conference absolutely as a beginner. You should do that, but if you suddenly had an instinct that what you should need to do is put loads of swimwear models in your slides, this is probably not the right conference for that. So if you haven't read the Code of Conduct, do, and it's just a thing that we kind of all sign up for to say, okay, let's agree to behave like this and make it as inclusive as possible. Is that kind of the answer you were looking for, Nick? Yeah, fine. All right, any other questions about Python and its ecosystem? Have you come, okay, so first person to find a piece of jargon that they didn't understand that they would like a definition for will get a prize. Piece of jargon, anyone? Anyone need a definition for something? Nope. No, I've got all these unused Pythonistas. Okay, yeah, that's Python people, I guess, people who program in Python. Pythonic is code that seems to obey the... Has anyone done import this and looked up the Zen of Python, which I suggested earlier? Make sure you do that. Go into a Python interpreter and type import this. Read the Zen of Python. And if you don't understand any of those things, ask your coach, and your coach will give you a special prize for asking that question.
I don't think it has anything to do with Australia. Sometimes I hear people talk about this word dunder.
Oh, yeah.
What is it?
There you go. That is actually in the jargon file. What's a dunder? Dunder is a controversial bit of jargon in Python, and it stands for double underscore. So you might have seen in your Python source code is from time to time there's a method name in a class that starts with underscore underscore init underscore underscore dot py or underscore underscore something. And we sometimes pronounce that as dunder, although there are small parts of the community that absolutely hate that and they would rather you didn't say dunder. I think dunder is great. Dunder in it. Instead of saying underscore underscore in it, that's crazy. Nobody's got that much time. Yes, sir? What about magic? Oh, magic functions and dunder functions are actually closely related, and anyone who's really interested in do that should do the magic methods challenge that's in the repository today. There you go. Yeah, I'm not going to answer that directly. You can find out more. Yes?
Speaking of community, I've been to both Ruby and Python conferences, and I've always wondered why is it that these languages never try to get into, let's say, the university or the high school level.
Yeah.
Python has started making inroads into universities.
Yes. Absolutely. So, so at the end of the session, I'm going to do some recommended talks. Nick has got a talk about Python in education on Monday, which I'd encourage you to go to. But yeah, Python does seem to be kind of winning the battle of when people are saying, okay, what should we teach people as a first introductory language? It seems to be Python. For years, and especially in universities, it was Java, partially because Java is open source, just like Python is, so it's free. You didn't have to pay anyone for the installation of it. And partially because Java was very popular in the enterprise, in kind of big business. And so universities thought that they were doing the best job they could by introducing their students to this language Java that was so widely used, so that they would be able to go on and use that in their careers. But Java, although it was open source and very successful, is a language that's very obsessed with the object-oriented model of programming, classes and objects, to the extent that it kind of gets in the way of doing real programming. And people have tended to find that Java's all very well, but it's actually kind of overcomplicated for a beginner. And possibly it's overcomplicated full stop. And that when you get to Python, Python is much more stripped down, much more minimal. So I showed you that piece of code that said how to do hello world in C and in Python. Hello world in Java is just like the C one, only slightly more complicated, with slightly more what we call boilerplate. Oh, I'll tell you what, 2 bits of jargon I will give you just now, which I've really enjoyed from the Python community, and I think they're illustrative, are bike shedding and yak shaving. So these are 2 things that I learned as a programmer, which you'll recognize, I think. And the first one is yak shaving, and yak shaving is when you set off to do a task, and you go, right, okay, I'm going to go and do this program over here. And then you go, oh, hang on, actually the auto-completion in my editor is not working. I wonder if I'm just going to go and look up the help documentation for how autocomplete works in this editor. And you go, actually, I think I'm using the wrong auto-completion plugin for my editor, so I think I'm going to maybe go and download this other new one, and oh no, that needs a C compiler to actually install the little server to do the auto-completion tag, so I have to download some C compilation code. And then you're like, I've always wondered how C compilation works, actually, so maybe I'm going to go and write a tutorial. And you end up basically spending an awful lot of time on a task that is very distantly related to the actual original task that you started off with, and is not obviously ever going to have a real end, and that's when you're yak shaving. And so it's one of the bits of terminology we use to kind of identify a thing. And the other one is bike shedding, And this is a story, an apocryphal story about the design of a nuclear power plant, which is going forwards to the planning community of the local government. And the local government are looking at the blueprints for a nuclear power plant, and obviously they don't understand any of it. And so the committee sits down and has a 4-hour deliberation over the color of the bike sheds, because that's the bit that everyone understands and that everyone feels they have to express an opinion about. So there's a 4-hour argument about the color of bike sheds in a nuclear power plant. And that's something that also happens in Python. We recognize that happening as programmers when we're having discussions in open source communities about what the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do or how to do it is. Because we want to be a sort of very flat, non-hierarchical, everyone has a voice, and if everyone has a voice, everyone feels that they would like to express themselves, and you can't help this, but when you identify that a conversation is kind of nitpicking over a small detail and has been doing so for ages, we'll call that bike shedding. Yep, bike shedding, yes. And so you'll pretty soon discover that. I mean, we can be bike shedding over exactly what editor to use or yes, whether to call double underscores dunders or what, or underscores. Yes, good one. All right, good. So that's my Python ecosystem talk. It's 11 o'clock. Oh, there was a question over there. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, fine. So the question there is about camel casing. When you're naming something in Python, and you want to call it my special fruity widget, when you want to write that down, you can't just go my space special space because spaces aren't valid in variable names. So you kind of have two choices. Well, there's lots of choices, but two main choices have evolved. One is using underscores to represent spaces. So you're going to go my underscore special underscore fruity underscore widget, all lowercase. And the other one is to go my lowercase, then capital S, and then so capitalize the initial letter of each character. So one is kind of visually, you can see it's my underscore blah, blah, special fruity widget, and the other one is my special fruity widget with capital letters for each word. And so one is kind of a long series of things with underscores, and the other one goes up, and they're kind of two different conventions for how you represent variable names that contain multiple words. In general, the Python world has settled on underscores being the preferred way of doing it, with the exception of class names. When you're naming classes, you tend to use, well, uppercase letters. And that's just a convention. No one's forcing anyone to do that. Python will understand both equally well. Python understands it if you just mash all the words together as well, or if you call everything just x, or x1, x2, x3. But we've settled on underscores. Partially that's arbitrary. So the people have actually gone and done studies on this, like scientific studies, on how quickly can you read camel case versus underscores, variable names, and there's no difference once you're used to it. But there is some evidence that for beginners, underscores are slightly more easy to understand and intuitive. So the end result is fine in either case, and so you find that camel case is very prevalent in Java, in the C# and communities, and in JavaScript. But in Python, we tend to prefer underscores. There you go. Does that answer the question? Yeah. So, but there's a couple of little stalwarts out there that still love their camel case, and the Invent with Python, Al Swiegert, is one. What's a good word for a person that's holding out against the tide? I don't know. Iconoclast. No, one iconoclast. Yeah, so one of the things about the Python community is once we've settled on a thing that's by convention, you're allowed to do whatever you want, but people will raise an eyebrow at you if you do the wrong thing. And we have that about underscores and coding conventions in Java. There's a thing called PEP8, which is the standards for, what's our kind of all agreed preferred way of answering all the optional questions of, how should we name functions, how many spaces should we have between, method definitions, how many characters should we wrap at, and so on. There is an official set of answers to that everyone agrees on. And in the one sense, it's kind of restraining people's creativity to say, hey, look, you have to use underscores, that's what we've all decided, and camel case is kind of wrong. But on the other hand, if we do all agree on a thing, that means that everyone understands each other better. And in general, in Python, we tend to come down on the, understanding each other is more important than the expressing your individualities through your choice of casing in variable names. Good. Yes. Fine, well, let me get you back on with the tutorials. I think we're due to finish at 12, so I'm going to do right at the end a final kind of 10-minute wrap-up of how to get the best out of the conference. A few suggested talks I'll send you a link to rather than telling you them one by one, but just like what to expect from the week ahead and answer some of your questions like, is it okay to, what's the best, or who should I approach and start a new conversation with, and who should I leave alone to their own devices, and how should I approach meeting new people at this conference? I have answers for you. A hint, just talk to everybody. Hey everyone, we're coming towards the end of the day, so I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming. Now, I'm doing this. I'm glad this is. We have to. All right. Okay. All right. Fine. Yeah. Good. Okay, everyone. How are you all doing? This is just one of my trademarks. You've got to stand on something to be able to get people's attention. So thanks very much for coming. We're basically coming up to the end, and I just wanted to give you a few words on getting the most out of the conference. But first, I wanted to say, how have you found it? Have you found, so hands up if you've enjoyed your tutorial so far. Okay, good. So, you, sir, which tutorial were you doing?
I was doing the magic method for kind of tangents.
Yeah?
Things, so
How did you get on?
very good, yeah.
Okay. Fine. So that's it. I really need some feedback on this session. So I've run this once before at one conference. This is my second time running it. I'm not really happy with any kind of tutorial until I've done it 4 or 5 times. So I really need you to come back to me and say, Harry, this worked well, this worked not so well. From my own personal point of view, like for example, preparing USB keys with all the installers of Python and PDF copies of the tutorials, that is something I should have done before coming here, and I didn't. So I apologize to you all for that, but I managed to get some out. So anything like that where you thought, this didn't go so smoothly, I think if you were to do it again, I would prefer it to be different, or maybe you can figure out some way of solving this problem. Please let me know. And secondly, please let me know what you did enjoy about it, like what you found nice, what you found valuable from the tutorial, whether it was whether one of the lectures or the introductions or whatever. One of the lectures or one of the tutorials or whatever. Yes. Good. Any reactions or anything anyone wants to share straight away at this stage by saying, hey, everyone, Harry, I really enjoyed this, or hey, Harry, next time you really have to fix this. Go on. Make this interactive. First person to suggest something wins a prize. Yes? Better Wi-Fi. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So I'm taking that to say, yes, okay, obviously, but also better preparation with USB keys might be a partial fix to that issue. Thank you, sir. Also, who was saying this? Alan, or no, Dwight. I could actually run my own Wi-Fi and have all the resources and things available on my own computer and share it with you guys. That's a possibility to explore. Good. Any other suggestions or reactions or, yep? Yes. Yeah? Okay, good. There's someone there bigging up the Django Girls tutorial, which, yeah, I totally agree. Having written a book that I wanted to make reasonably sensitive to beginners or to try and really think about the learning curve and making it as shallow as possible, when I read the Django Girls tutorial, I really said, look, these guys have done a great job of trying to make, really address these, yeah, okay. Shouldn't say these guys. Those, mostly girls. Yeah, did a really good job of anticipating kind of the questions that beginners have. So I might push that a bit harder, the Django Girls tutorial as an introductory tutorial. Thanks for the tip. Or I'll tell those guys, those not guys, those people to write a book, which I think they're starting on. That's actually just an introduction to Python instead of an introduction to Django. Good. Thanks. Good feedback. There you go. Any other? Yes, sir.
I think getting into the similar groups with similar levels is a great idea.
Yeah.
I think that really trying to make the tutorial as much of a situation of each of us driving forward at our own individual pace.
Yeah. Yeah.
A really good idea.
Thank you.
So, we're on the right track with that.
Oh, great. Thank you. Positive feedback there. I do appreciate that. They say that people respond to positive and negative feedback differently, and particularly when you're starting out with something, you're going to get more out of positive feedback. But when you're beginning to reach a certain level of expertise, you get more value from negative feedback. So I'm kind of halfway, so I really need both. Maybe like lots of positive feedback is good for my ego. Not that my ego's that small. Right. Any other thoughts? Anything anyone wants to share at that point? Yes?
I know that in some of your other talks,
Yeah.
your programming,
Yeah.
we ended up doing about coincidence here and also about the groups. I think that's
Yeah.
it's like a really good system.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So I do introductory test-driven development tutorial, and I usually I usually strongly encourage people to do pair programming for those, and I do find it works. Like sitting there, first of all, like when two people are attacking a problem, you've got a better chance of getting through it faster, and you can teach each other as well. So I'm glad that that's happened a little bit in this session. My only problem with this is at a table of 4 with one coach, there are 2 people sitting next to each other, and there's one person on their own. Or to put it in the flip side, there is one person sitting immediately next to a coach, and there are 2 people who are further away from the coach, and that's a little bit broken. So if anyone's got any clever suggestions for how to fix that issue, I'd be interested in it. Magically getting round tables may not be an option. Yeah? Just have 3 people? Yes? And like as long as you don't have 2 and 1, right? You'd have to have somehow people on 3 different sides, wouldn't you? But like maybe 5 actually is a similar solution. Like so you have 4 people learning on the table, and then 1 coach at one end. And then yeah. It sounds like a topology problem, really. Right? Fine. Okay, no more topology. Good. Thanks very much, everyone. Okay, good. So we have 10 minutes. So here you are. You've come to a programming conference. Some of you have never done programming before, or some of you are just starting out with Python. Here, hands up who's been to a programming conference before, excluding the coaches, please. Okay. So the rest of you might not have too much in the way of expectations. Before I was a programmer, I was a management consultant, which was very tedious indeed. And there was no such thing as a management conference, a management consultant conference. And I think that's probably a good thing. But so when I first went to a programming conference, I just remember it being a breath of fresh air, really. As a moderately nerdy person, which at least some people in the room would identify with, that situation where you're in a social environment and maybe some sort of computery or nerdy subject comes up, and you kind of feel like going off on one and saying, well, blah 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 blah, and that you actually have to kind of restrain yourself because at some point you've gone way past what anybody else cares about, and so you should maybe stop talking about computers and programming now. The great thing about programming conferences is there is no such point. You just keep going and you get rewarded for it. So it's wonderful to just be surrounded by nerds, and the Python nerds are a particularly lovely branch of nerds. I mean, there is quite a lot of asparagus syndrome around, so there are some kinds of people who, asparagus syndrome, you've heard of it, it's on the autism spectrum. Asperger's, some people call it. I think asparagus is better, yeah. So asparagus syndrome, some people are going to be maybe not have the full range of social skills, but they just, this is a great environment for them, and I include myself in that category to a certain extent. It's just lovely to be surrounded by people who share a common interest with you, and they're there's no such thing as droning on for too long about it because the other person is just as interested, and it's wonderful. And it doesn't matter if you spend the whole time looking at your shoes. I remember coming on to the subject of what talks to watch, what makes a good talk is kind of 2 things. One is the content, and as you're looking through the schedule, you'll be able to look through the schedule and look at the content of a talk and go, that sounds interesting, I should go to that. And the other thing the other thing that's almost more important that makes a talk great is how good the speaker is. And so I wanted to encourage you, when you're trying to choose your talks, I'm going to send you a list of recommended talks, or I've put a list of recommended talks in the repo, which you can take a look at now. I did it during the session. So by all means, take a look at those, but also take inspiration from the people you meet at the conference. If they tell you, oh, wow, such and such's talk last year was so good, or X is such a good speaker, what you'll find is even if the topic sounds completely uninteresting to you, or maybe even way above your head, you should go anyway. Because as often as not, if someone's got a reputation for being a good speaker, their talk is interesting no matter what. And so, a good speaker really makes a talk and can really make a subject fascinating or entertaining. So definitely bear that in mind. But the flip side to that is that even the worst speaker, and I remember this guy who was giving a talk on this tool called SQL Map, which is a penetration testing library. Basically, it's a hacking tool which lets you try and hack websites to see if they've got database problems so you can get in and get root passwords on their servers. And he was giving this talk, but he was kind of a co-maintainer of the project, and the main guy who was supposed to be there giving the talk couldn't come. So he was just handed these slides and was reading them, and he was this sort of Ukrainian, shaven-headed, kind of 20 20-year-old kid, and he was like really scared. And he spent the whole thing just going, okay, I came into SQL map project. He never made eye contact with the audience. And he just spent this whole time looking at the slides and kind of reading them out and sweating. And it was like the worst presentation skills ever. And the talk was great because the subject matter was just so interesting and it just doesn't matter. So that's the other part of it, is that, we're totally prepared to forgive that kind of like terrible awkwardness because we've got this sort of shared passion. Yeah, that was a great talk. I work on SQL Map is hacking project, and when I first got invited to work on it, I was so excited that he would let me contribute. And now I am core committer. It's very exciting. And we have mailing list with lots of white hat hackers and also some black hats. I think maybe some pretty bad people on list. He was so funny. Good. So that's how to choose talks. So recommendations, but also listen to what people are saying about who's a good speaker and try and get into that talk. And so then also there's attention. I mean, there's so many good talks. There's the problem of like there'll be two talks on at the same time that you desperately want to see, and you're like, what am I doing? Sometimes there'll be no talk that you can decide that you want to see. And so I'm going to encourage you not to obsess too much about seeing all the talks that you desperately wanted to see. All these talks are being recorded, so if you miss one, you can watch the recording. And although it is lovely to be in the room, and we talked about community earlier, and Justin, bless his heart, you don't have to be there. And actually, lots of the value of the conference is the reason we all meet in person rather than just watching these talks online, is that we get to talk to each other. So if you find yourself in an interesting conversation with someone, don't just break off that conversation just because you are desperate to go into a talk, or don't feel you have to. Just continue with that conversation, and that's called the hallway track. So we have different tracks of talks. Well, one of them is the conversations that you just have in the hallway, and that's just as important as the talks themselves. So yeah, don't beat yourself up about missing talks if you're stuck in an interesting conversation. That's great stuff, and usually even better than the actual talk, which you can watch later. Good. Other bad presentational tactics, don't look back at your slides. It's terrible. Fine. Approaching people. So this is about... you're sitting there, you don't know too many people at the conference, you're in a break between some talks, and there's a person standing over there, and they're kind of like looking at their phone, kind of maybe checking their emails or wondering what talk to do next, and they kind of seem so involved in their little world. Should you go over there and interrupt them? And try and make a new friend, or are you going to be kind of a bit rude and imposing on them? The answer is yes, of course you should go and interrupt them. That person is only looking at your phone because that's what we all do as soon as we've got nothing better to do. But actually, they're sitting there quite lonely. And if you walk up to them and go, "Hey, how are you? What talk did you just see? Are you enjoying the conference? What have you seen so far?" That person is going to give you a bunch of answers to that, and you'll have made a new friend. So talk to everyone you can. Never feel shy or embarrassed about going to talk to someone. If it turns out they are a little bit of an introvert and kind of and they don't really want to talk to you, there'll be an excuse pretty soon for you guys to separate, and it'll be fine. But you know what? Every single time, that guy or girl is going to be glad that you interrupted them and they've got an opportunity to talk to someone new. So that's all true. And then the final thing is, outside of the main talks, yes, Jason?
What would be some good icebreaker questions to ask?
Yeah, good. So what are some ways? So are you enjoying the conference so far? What talks have you seen? What talks have you enjoyed so far? Those are all pretty easy. And more tips for people with asparagus syndrome. You could talk about how they got to the conference and other, typical social interaction types of things. There's probably a website somewhere, easy icebreakers. No, what talks have you seen so far? What's been good? How are you enjoying it? What kind of programming do you do? Oh yes, when did you start learning Python? Those kinds of things. Any other suggestions? Good icebreaker questions? What's your favorite kind of dinosaur? Yeah.
I got asked that one.
Okay, good. Yeah. What? Dino? Okay. Oh, yeah. Good dinosaur. Yeah, absolutely. Never ask that to a little kid because they know way more about dinosaurs than you did. I remember, I was talking to my nephew, and he was going, blah, 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 something, velociraptors. And of course, they have feathers. And I went, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, they've got feathers. I'm like, no, they don't. Velociraptors don't have feathers. What are you talking about? You're like, come on. All right, old man, let me tell you, a lot of things have been discovered about dinosaurs since you cared about this. They sure did. They had feathers. Any other suggestions or reactions to that? Fine. Open spaces and buffs. Open space sessions are kind of, alongside the main talks, you'll find people who have a particular interest will publish an open space where they say, I'm going to have an open space about interest X. And we're going to get a little room or a little space section in the conference where we can all get together at a particular time and talk about X. And it might just be like people who are interested in hacking Arduino hardware and robotics. There might be an open space for that. Or people who are interested in, there you go, MicroPython. Python on microcontrollers or whatever. So look out for those as well as the conference. And if you spot something that's interesting, or if you just spot something that's weird, go to it. And don't be scared of picking talks that look like they're way over your head. Everyone has this experience, from the lowliest Python developer to someone who's been coding for ages, of going to a talk about PyPy and being completely baffled and just wandering out of it going, oh, okay, I have no idea what just happened. That's part of the experience. And then BOFs are similar to open spaces, maybe less formally organized, but BOF stands for birds of a feather, and so people who have a particular interest, which might be outside of programming, might get together for a birds of a feather session. Sometimes they're in the evening. There's a lovely session called the storytelling BOF, where people just get together and tell stories, which is nice. And then there's often I organize a thing called the whiskey BOF, which is people who share an interest in whiskey and who would like to get together and drink whiskey. Which is a charming event, but I have to go home on Monday, so there might not be a whiskey BOF, or at least not one that I organize this year. If you guys like whiskey, maybe you want to be the new whiskey BOF organizer. Yes. That's it. And then finally, lunch. Similar story to the approaching people. Like, where should you sit at lunch? Maybe you've ended up at a talk on your own. You've picked up a bunch of food, and you're like, well, should I just sit at a table on my own? I'm a bit scared. Why not just sit at a table full of people, sit down there and say, hi, everyone, my name's Jeff, my name's Louise, my name's Zog, the Space Invader. What's your name? What have you been enjoying so far? And what are you all talking about? Hi, I'm Harry. What are you all talking about? I do that all the time. So yes, that's it. Good. All right. So have a little, another browse of the GitHub repo for those recommended talks. I put almost one per slot, occasionally two, and occasionally none of talks on there. Yes, question, Neil? Oh, yeah, okay. So there are two other things in the conference you'll see. There's exhibitors and booths. So, people who have companies that want to grab your interest, you should talk to them. They might give you jobs. And there are poster sessions as well, which are sessions where an individual person with a passion has got a little poster and they want to talk to you about it. Go and talk to them. I hear there's an excellent one on a kind of a Lisp interpreter, which is a weird functional programming language from the 1940s that's like been made into a Python-y flavor. I think there's a really fascinating poster about that you should all look out for. Yes, Nick?
Someone was just asking, what the hell's a repo?
What the hell's a repo?
And where do I find one?
Haha. I did have the address on there. A repo is short for source code repository. See, recos in repo. I did that for you guys there. A little bit of jargon poetry for you. Recommendations in the repo. Source code repository. You remember I mentioned Git earlier on, the tool that does source code control, but also lets us collaborate. A source code repository is what you get out of source code plus the Git tool, and you can publish them online on places like GitHub, but also Bitbucket and GitLab. And they're like published online versions of some code, and the kind of slides and materials and notes for these sessions are code because they're just text, and I've published them online. And that includes recommendations for talks, and the kind of jargon file are on the repo, which you can find at the address, which I'll show right at the end here. I will do that immediately. Yep, there it is. So if you haven't been there yet, pop on over there, scroll down, there's a kind of README file which has links to all the bits, and inside the link called Python ecosystem, the bottom of that is the jargon file, which has all the definitions and links to further information and book recommendations about Python ecosystems, concepts, and then there's a file in there you can click on as well called talk recommendations, which is just a series of links to talks from the schedule. Yeah, good, okay, question over there. Yes?
Is there a central place to
usually there's some sort of notice board with post-it notes. Oh, finally, I didn't mention lightning talks. You'll see something in the schedule called lightning talks. That is sometimes the best part of the conference. They're short talks limited to an absolute maximum of 5 minutes, but sometimes less than that. And they could be any kind of thing. So like what I did in my holidays, some sort of Python module, a little project that I built. I really like bowling, so let me tell you about bowling for 5 minutes and the physics of it. whatever it might be. Lightning talks are great fun. Make sure you get down to lightning talks. And if you are even vaguely inclined, why not let that little imp of the show-offiness inside you develop and go and propose a lightning talk. If you happen to have a little passion or something you think people might be interested in hearing about, and people are interested in almost anything, that's why they come to conferences, propose a lightning talk and give one yourself. That's an open sign-ups for those. Make sure you get to them. Yeah, so you'll find notice boards that have listings of the BOF sessions and the open spaces, and you'll find a sign-up board for lightning talks where you just put your name and the title of the talk, and maybe the next day you'll be up for 5 minutes to give a talk. I've given lightning talks. I've given several. My second ever lightning talk was a disastrous failure. It's fine. I survived. Everyone clapped anyway. And then my third one was better. So don't be scared. There you go. Yeah. Fine. Well, so that's it, really. Thank you so much for coming. It's been lovely to have you. It's been lovely to work with you all. I hope you have a lovely conference.